أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. Yesterday we ended our discussion on a chapter of the life of the Prophet in which he took the time to write letters to the kings of the world. And we said that this was a very important development in the political aspect and the social aspect that Islam was going to take on. Because up until this point, Islam was a religion that was seen within the context of the Arabian Peninsula. Up until now, it was seen as a religion that the Arab were fighting over, and some of the small Jewish tribes that were in that area were also involved in. But now the Prophet took the time to write letters to the king of Persia, to the king of Rome, to the king of Ethiopia, that is Najashi, and also to the king and the Muqawqis of Misr. This was a title they used to give to the kings of Egypt. And each of these letters that the Prophet wrote, there were slightly different ways that he addressed these individuals, but all of them he addressed with respect, and all of them he spoke with a very basic logic. And that basic logic was that if you were to embrace the faith in my message, you will be rewarded, and you will be rewarded heavily, because with your conversion will come the conversion of many other people. And if you are to reject my message, then not only is your sin on your shoulders, the sin of your people will also be on your shoulders as well. And we read in history that the kings that the Prophet wrote these letters to, each of them responded in their own way. The Khusro of Persia had the harshest of response. He tore apart the letter of the Prophet before even reading it. And the Prophet said to his companions that one day his kingdom will be torn apart the same way he tore apart my letter. And the king or the Caesar of Rome also rejected the faith, but he did it in a kinder way, in a nicer way. The rejection was done with gifts. And the Prophet said that simply because he wasn't as harsh in his response, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow his kingdom to continue for a little longer, but he will be held accountable in the akhirah. And Najashi, of course, was the one who had the best response, because the king of Egypt also responded like the Caesar of Rome. He also rejected the faith, but Najashi was the one who accepted the faith. And there were many lessons that we learned from these letters that the Prophet wrote to the kings of his time. Tonight, inshallah, we're going to delve into another chapter of the life of the Prophet, and that is the conquest of Mecca. Because now the Prophet has been away from Mecca for almost 7-8 years. Now he's going to turn his eyes back towards Mecca. And this chapter, this highlight from the life of the Prophet, is one that comes with many, many lessons. And it will also have quite a bit of a role to play on a social and political aspect as well, because it's going to change everything for the Prophet and the Muslim Ummah from this point onwards. And tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into this topic by posing the following questions. Number one, the peace treaty that the Prophet had with Quraysh that we spoke about yesterday, the peace treaty known as the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah. How did Quraysh break this peace treaty? How did they even allow for the Prophet now to come back to Mecca and to conquer the city of Mecca? Number two, how did the Prophet strategically plan? While he was putting together this big army, how did he plan and how did he execute in such a way that the people in Mecca never found out about him coming until the final day? Number three, when people asked the Prophet on multiple occasions while he had already left Medina and he was on his way towards Mecca, when they used to ask him, Ya Rasulullah, where are we going? What's the final destination? Where are we headed? How would the Prophet respond to them in these moments? Number four, what did Imam Ali say when the woman who had come and was helping a spy of Quraysh in Medina to take a letter to them about the army of the Prophet coming? What did Ali ibn Abi Talib say to the woman when she claimed that she had no letter with her, whereas the Prophet had said the letter was in fact with her? And number five, and finally, how long did it take between Ahzab and 10,000 of the people who had come to put an end to Muhammad, laying siege to the city of Medina? How long did that take compared to the conquest of Mecca, where 10,000 is going to come from the other side now and going to lay siege to Mecca? How quickly do the tables turn? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Allow us to begin from here. We are now in the 8th year of Hijrah. Ahzab happened in the 5th year of Hijrah. Between these two events, we mentioned there were a couple of events that took place. One was the letters that we discussed, and the other was the peace treaty that the people of Mecca and the people of Medina had put together. Part of this peace treaty was that obviously Mecca and Medina were not going to go to war with each other. But another part of the peace treaty was that the people that you have covenants with and the people that Medina has covenants with also are not going to go to war with each other. So it was a peace treaty that had further implications. And that if some people from your own side, not your own tribe, but other tribes were part of your covenant, if they went to war, then this was a way of breaking the peace treaty, because they were all part of one pact. So anyone out of this pact does something, it's like they've broken this peace treaty. It's like you find sometimes in political settings where different countries come together. So you attack one of them, it's like you've attacked all of them, yes? And if one of them attacks the others, they have to either say, you know what, we have nothing to do with this one, or they have to help to pay for the damages or something like that, because they're all responsible as a group. This is what the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah was. The Prophet and a number of tribes were on one side. Quraysh and a couple of other tribes were on the other side. And interestingly enough, in this 8th year after Hijrah, there's an incident that took place that didn't directly involve the Prophet or didn't directly involve Quraysh as much. But it was still a way of breaking the peace treaty. What happened here? One of the tribes that was on the side of the Prophet, known as the tribe of Khuza'ah, they were part of the covenant of the Prophet on this side. They were on the Prophet's side. They were then attacked by one of the tribes who had a peace treaty with Quraysh. They were on Quraysh's side. So a tribe from this side attacked a tribe from the other side. The Prophet wasn't involved and Quraysh wasn't involved necessarily. But this tribe attacked the other tribe because of some of the grudges that they had from before Islam. They finally find a moment to take out their grudge and act upon it. So Bani Bakr, which was the friends of Quraysh, they take out a military raid on Khuza'ah, who is part of the covenant of the Prophet with them. And so they attack them. And in this attack, which happens in the middle of the night, and you could tell it was out of hatred because they had not even come to war with them. It was in the middle of the night. This Bani Bakr, they get together, they attack Khuza'ah. And these details aren't too important for us. This is just to set the stage for the conquest of Mecca. And when they attack them, this attack was such a severe attack that Khuza'ah, who didn't live too far away from Mecca either, they were also part of this Mecca, they started to run from their homes into the haram. So when you go into the haram, then certain things that are halal outside become haram inside of the haram, right? In the haram, there's a number of rules. Like you can't hunt animals in haram, right? And you can't fight in the haram. They ran into the haram because this is the only option that they had left to themselves. And these people from Bani Bakr, who had gotten help from Quraysh as well, they attacked them. Even in the haram, they killed some of them. And this turned into this massacre. And the problem was that it wasn't just Bani Bakr. They had also gotten help from Quraysh as well. Some say Quraysh himself came and helped. Some say no, they gave them swords and weaponry and so on and so forth to carry out this military raid. The news comes to the prophets. And it's interesting that while they're sending the news, behind the scenes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the prophets that something has happened with Khuzara. And the narration says he turned to his wife Aisha and he said, I feel like something has happened with Khuzara. Something's up. Something has happened. And she said, Ya Rasulullah, what has happened? He said, they have done something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has His own plans. Because this small little seed of breaking this peace treaty, no one in their wildest thoughts and their wildest guess, no one is going to assume this is going to lead to the conquest of Mecca. No one's even thinking this right now. They think, okay, it's an issue between these two tribes, you got to solve it. But the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him he has his own plans. And Aisha said, is the end of it good for the Muslims? Khayrun? He said, khayrun. It's going to be a good outcome. So the messengers from Khuzara come and they are now full of pain because they're coming to Medina to tell them that we are on your side, Ya Rasulullah, and they attacked us, they massacred us. They are essentially coming to give the news but also asking for the help of the Prophet. Like if we have to do something against them because of what they have done. So they come to the Prophet and they share some of the massacre that took place. And the narration says the Prophet was extremely upset at what had happened. And in some narration it says his eyes got filled up with tears. Because these are women, these are children, these are people who were just massacred in the middle of the night. They had no one to defend them in these moments. So the Prophet turned towards this head of Khuzara. And he said, it's fine, you go back. And we will come to help you against this other group, which would be the tribe of Bani Bakr and Quraysh and all of them. Because they're all part of one now. So we will come and we will help you. Nusirta, the help of Allah is coming. But interestingly, the Prophet never explained how is he going to help them. And you'll see that the Prophet, every step of the way, he's going to keep everything a secret. Now, you and I, when we try to keep things secret, it's easy. Because maybe 1-2 people, and even at that we fail usually, right? Even at that, we tell this person, we tell that person. The Prophet is now going to put together an army of thousands of people, and somehow, some way, he's going to keep it a secret that Mecca will not find out about this. This is what the Prophet does. So he told them, he said, I'm going to come and help you. But he didn't tell them how. What are we going to do? What's the plan? No one is even thinking about conquest of Mecca. No, forget about that. This is just a small issue. No one is thinking about that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet have their own plan. So he didn't say anything about this. He told them to go back to Mecca. Khuzara, go back to Mecca. But he said, when you're going back, you all need to spread out. And you need to divide your group so that when you're going back to Mecca, Abu Sufyan and his people, if they see you're all spread out in your small groups, they will not think to themselves necessarily that you are here with me, and they will not anticipate that I might do something about what has happened. So he said, you need to spread out amongst one another. And the narration says they started to make their way back to Mecca. They spread out, and Abu Sufyan did in fact run into one of these groups. And when he saw one of these groups, Abu Sufyan was already worried because he already knows that this peace treaty has technically been broken already. So he turned to them, he said, where are you coming from? They didn't give him information. He kept asking. They didn't give him information because they knew if they were to give him information, that would be the end of everything. So finally they left. And Abu Sufyan said, you go on your way and we'll go on our way. But Abu Sufyan pulled the same trick he had pulled before in Badr. He went and he checked the droppings of their camels. And he found in the droppings of their camels what? Some of the seeds of the dates of Medina. And he said, by Allah, these guys were with Muhammad. Like they have something happening. Now, even when he says this, he's not thinking conquest of Mecca. He thinks maybe the Prophet is going to come ask for revenge, whatever the case might be. The Prophet then sent a messenger himself. The messenger came. And the message from the messenger was this. See, this is the logic of the Prophet. He didn't say, you broke the peace treaty, I'm going to come ruin everything for you. He gave them options. He said, listen, you have 3 options. Number 1, you killed maybe 20 people from this side. Okay, you have to give their blood money. That's option number 1. You killed someone, you give them blood money. And this is the easiest of options, because technically their lives shouldn't have been spared, but this was the option that the Prophet gave them. If you're able to give them blood money, but the blood money of 20 people is not a small thing. Blood money of 20 people is a lot. That's a lot of camels. Some have said 200 camels. That's a lot. So that's option number 1. What's option number 2? He said, option number 2 is this. You pull your protection away from this tribe so that we deal with this tribe ourselves. You're Quraysh. This is Bani Bakr. We will deal with Bani Bakr ourselves. But they won't be under your protection anymore, meaning that if we deal with them, you can't come and protect them. Deal with them directly. They said, no, we give up our own people. And at this point, the number of tribes who still had not embraced the faith of Islam were very little. And this was one of the only tribes who had not embraced the faith of Islam, Bani Bakr. And so Quraysh said, if we give up this last tribe, we're going to be left with nothing. They said, no, we can't have this either. The third option, what's the third option? The third option is that the peace treaty is null. There's no other option. And the people of Quraysh, out of their arrogance, they said, you know what? We'll take option number 3. We're not going to pay you, and we're not going to leave our friends alone. Our peace treaty is null. It's done. No peace treaty between us. The messenger of the Prophet came back to Medina. And as he was coming back to Medina, Quraysh immediately realized the big mistake that they had made. And so they sent Abu Sufyan, and they say, Abu Sufyan, go and see if you can convince Muhammad to hold on to this peace treaty. Because they knew now that the power of the Prophet has grown. It's not the same Muhammad in Badr and Uhud. This is different now. They sent Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan came to Medina. And this is where the humiliation of Abu Sufyan started to show itself. Because Abu Sufyan was the one who was the proud one. Abu Sufyan was the one after Uhud, he came and said, 1 year us, 1 year you guys. You guys won 1 battle, we won 1 battle. We have this idol, we have that idol. He was the one who's the most proud. But now he came to Medina and he was begging. And the narration says he came to the Prophet and he said, Muhammad, add to the time of this peace treaty. Like, don't break the peace treaty. And the Prophet said, you've already rejected that option. It's done. And he went around begging other people to come and speak to the Prophet. Begging other people to come and maybe, mediate between him and the Prophet. And who did he go to? He went to a number of the famous companions of the Prophet. Then when he found no option at all, he went to Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, Ya Ali, go and speak to Muhammad about this. This is the humiliation of Abu Sufyan. He's begging now. And Ali said, the line that we all expect Ali ibn Abi Talib to say, he said, when the Prophet has made a decision, I can't talk him out of it. That's not what I do. Then Abu Sufyan didn't give up. He came to who? He came to the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima. And he said, Fatima, you're the daughter of the Prophet. Now you get his mindset. His mindset is the mindset of tribes. In tribes, if you have blood relationship connection, you can make something happen. You can save someone's life. You can do something like that. But this is not the tribal logic anymore. This is the command of Allah, and this is what's going to happen. Just because the Prophet has a daughter doesn't mean he's going to make emotional decisions based on his daughter. And this is a big difference between how the two schools of thought look at the Prophet. Sometimes people speak about the Prophet as if he was this person who, if you ask him because of his child, he'll listen. If you ask him because of someone else, he won't listen. And not because that child has the greatest of status, but because that child is his daughter and he feels bad. And the Prophet was not a person whose emotions would get the best of him. The Prophet didn't make decisions based on emotions. He made decisions based on the command of Allah. And so Abu Sufyan came to Fatima, said, you go and speak to the Prophet. And Fatima said, this has nothing to do with me. And the narration says, Hassan alayhi salam was playing there. And he turned to Fatima and said, well, can your son go and ask? Maybe Muhammad will listen to him. And Fatima said, this is a child. What are you talking about? Came back to Ali ibn Abi Talib, said, I don't know what to do. And Ali said, listen, there's no option for you. But if you want to do one thing, you're the Sayyid of Quraysh. People know you as the head of Quraysh. Go out in the masjid and just call people and see who responds to you. He said, will this help me? And Ali said, no, it won't help you. But you won't let go, you won't give up. Just go. He went to the masjid, he said, I am the Sayyid of Kinana, I am the Sayyid of Quraysh. Who can come and give us some immunity? And it was quiet. Nobody. Everybody knows who this person is. And everybody knows the Prophet has already made his decision about the situation. So Abu Sufyan now starts to make his way back to Mecca. And the narration says, by the time he got back to Mecca, people had already come up with rumors that, Abu Sufyan himself is going to the side of the Prophet now. Because it had been a while since he was in Mecca. So he came into Mecca, he shaved his head, he started to worship the idols to prove to them, I'm still on this faith. I still worship these idols. I still don't believe in Muhammad and all of this kind of stuff. And this shows you that Abu Sufyan, that was at the prime of his pride, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did to him. And brought him down to a situation where he now has to beg. Maybe a child will go and mediate between him and a prophet. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing you and I that He gives izzah and pride to whoever He wants. And He takes away izzah and pride from whoever He wants. There are people, they will puff their chests and they will walk with pride. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to take that pride away from them, He does it very quickly. This is the same Abu Sufyan that before the Muslims used to hear his name, maybe their bodies used to tremble because they knew what Abu Sufyan could do. And now he's coming to Medina and he's begging the prophets. This is a big lesson for you and I. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What the Prophet then did was the following. Number one, he waited for time to pass from the issue of Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan went back to Mecca. And the Prophet waited because the Prophet is now going to start to put together his army and everything. But he wants it all to seem like people don't know exactly what his final goal is. And so he allowed for enough time to pass by where people would not associate his movement with the issue of Abu Sufyan and Mecca. He let time pass by. This was the first step that the Prophet took to keep all of this a secret. As we'll discuss, there's almost 9 steps the Prophet took to keep this whole scenario, this whole mission a secret. He allowed for time to pass. Then when the time came, close to the month of Ramadan that we're in, yes? Then he turned to his wife Aisha. He said, Aisha, you have to prepare for me because I'm going to go on a trip. But Aisha, don't tell anybody else. This is number 2. He said, don't share with anybody else that we are going on this trip. The narration says she started to prepare. As she started to prepare, her father came in. When her father came in, saw what's happening, he said, are you preparing for a trip? And technically she shouldn't have shared, but she did. She said, yes, the Prophet has told me that we're going on a trip. And Abu Bakr came to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, I've heard you're going on a trip. Where to? And the Prophet said, some narrations say he told him, some narrations says he didn't tell him. He said, we're going to this place, to Quraysh. But keep this a secret. This is number 3. This is how the Prophet executes. Now, if it was just in the hands of the Prophet, would he had even gone around and told even this other one person? Maybe not. But he already knows now. So he told him and he said, you can't share with anybody else. This is number 3. The number 4th thing was that this was happening in Ramadan. In Ramadan, nobody expected the Prophet to put together an army. They said Ramadan is a time for worship. He's never going to do anything like this in Ramadan. They're fasting. They're weaker in Ramadan. And this was the 4th step that the Prophet took to make sure that no one ever thinks that this is a conquest of Mecca. This was number 4. Number 5, what did he do? This is before he's even set out. He took another group of his army and ordered them to go to another area of the Arabian Peninsula. And everyone thought, oh, this is where the Prophet is going to go. And in reality, his main army has not even moved yet. This was a small group of his army. He sent with one of his companions to go to another part of the Arabian Peninsula. And they thought, this is probably where he's headed. This is number 5. Number 6, he wrote letters to all of the other tribes who were part of his covenants, part of this pact. And he said, you all have to join me for Ramadan in Medina. Ya Rasulullah, we're coming there for what? There's never been a gathering like this in Medina. He didn't share anything. He said, I need all of the tribes to come for Ramadan in Medina. We're going to spend Ramadan in Medina. And so slowly these tribes, they gather. One tribe after another tribe after another tribe. And it seems as though everything is set now. The numbers are adding. As things are coming together and the Prophet is putting together his army, the narration then says that one of the people of Medina, he wrote a letter to Quraysh. Because he saw the numbers are coming. He wrote a letter to the people of Quraysh. And his name was Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a. To put this into context, Hatib was the same person who took one of the letters of the Prophet to some of the kings. He's a close companion of the Prophet. He wrote a letter, and in this letter he told Quraysh, he said, listen, the army of Muhammad is coming. It's as dark as night, and it moves like a flood. Meaning there's no stopping this army. It's very heavily dense. And he wrote this letter and he gave it to a woman who was in Mecca to go, or in Medina to go to Mecca to give this news. Interestingly enough, this woman, we're going to pause here, this woman, she was a woman who had come to Medina many years ago. She was a singer. She was a mughanniya. Right? And obviously the singing at that time, it was pretty much all haram at that point. This mughanniya came to Medina and the Prophet saw her and said, you used to sing in Mecca. And she said, yes, I used to. But after Badr and Uhud, not many people are interested in my singing anymore. There's no more parties. There's no more, because Badr and Uhud were all, there's so many fatalities for Quraysh. And the Prophet, in his, the kindness that he had, because he understood that she's not going to go back to doing this anymore. The Prophet said, my companions, help her. And his companions gave her money and they gave her of clothing. This is a singer. This is what person you look at, you say, oh, this is a person who's sinner. Don't even talk to me. And the Prophet showed this type of kindness to her. Hatib gave the letter to this woman and said, you go. And as the Prophet is still in Medina, he receives the revelation that the letter is going. So he turned to his companions. He said, someone is giving the news of us to Quraysh. And he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib, and some narrations say Zubayr went with him as well. And he said, you go, and this lady is in this area and she's carrying the letter with her. Go and get the letter from her. So Ali and Zubayr went. They saw the lady, exactly where the Prophet had told them. They started to ask her. They said, you have the letter? She said, no, I don't have a letter. He said, but our Prophet has told us you have the letter. She started to cry. She said, no, I don't have any letter. This is an accusation. And then the narration says they started to search her stuff. They searched and searched. They couldn't find the letter. And at one point, Zubayr turned to Ali. He said, listen, the letter's not with her. We have to go back. And Ali ibn Abi Talib said, by Allah, the Prophet was not lied to, and by Allah, the Prophet did not lie to us. Meaning this is news that Jibreel brought to the Prophet, and he doesn't lie, and the Prophet told us, and the Prophet doesn't lie. The letter is somewhere here. And he turned to the lady, said, I will not let you go until you give me the letter. And this lady who realized that there's no more options, he said, fine, O son of Abu Talib, if you won't let me go, at least turn around. And Ali turned around and she opened the covering that she had on her hair. And in her hair, she had hidden the letter. But this is the faith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, that he doesn't walk away from the situation because he had a direct command from the Prophet that this lady has the letter. Zubayr on the other side, he said, it doesn't seem like she has the letter. He was ready to go back. And Ali said, no, the Prophet has not been lied to, and we have not been lied to either. So they took this letter. They brought it back to Medina. Now imagine the scene that is about to happen, and I'll explain the lesson that we can learn from this. They bring the letter back to Medina. The Prophet called out, as-salatu jami'atan. Everyone has to come together for this salat. This was a particular call they used to give when they wanted to make a big announcement. Everyone came to the masjid. The narration says the masjid was full. He said, people, we have put together this army, and you all know because you're all in Medina. But he said, as we put together this army, one of my companions has written this letter, and he sent it out towards Quraysh. I'm going to ask him to get up himself and to admit to his wrongdoing. Otherwise, Allah will tell me exactly who he is. Dead silence. He repeated it the second time. The second time. The third time. By the third time, then someone got up. And just imagine the embarrassment in this moment. Hatib got up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, it was me. I wrote the letter. And the Prophet, instead of rebuking him right there and then, he asked him, Hatib, why? Why would you do such a thing? Why would you betray all of your Muslim brothers and sisters? Thousands of lives could have been in jeopardy. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I have family in Mecca. I was worried that Meccans, you would attack and maybe my family would get caught up in the middle. This is why I wanted to give them a heads up. And the Prophet, though it's not a valid excuse, because thousands of lives were at jeopardy, but the Prophet was a bit kinder towards him. And the narration says that these Muslims, they looked at Hatib and they said, how dare you? And they were pushing him out of the masjid. And the narration says he was looking at the Prophet, hoping for the forgiveness of the Prophet. And the narration says the moment they pushed him out of the masjid, the Prophet told him to return him. And they brought Hatib back. And the Prophet said, Hatib, I have forgiven you. But do never return to doing anything like this. And this was the forgiveness of the Prophet. Someone who could have put to jeopardy the whole mission altogether in thousands of lives. The Prophet forgave him in maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And this also has a great lesson for you and I. Because the embarrassment that Hatib had in front of everybody is what, God forbid, you and I might experience on the Day of Judgment. Except we have something that Hatib doesn't have. We still have time. Hatib's time was up. They found his letter. You and I still have time. You say, well, what can I do so that I'm not embarrassed on the Day of Judgment? It's very easy. Tawbah. Tawbah. Repentance. You and I, we don't have to experience this. As long as you and I have the decency to do what? To repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, the shame and the embarrassment on the Day of Judgment is something to behold. It's something to behold. The Quran says faces will turn dark on that day. It's not a joke. This is word by word from what Quran says, yes? And the way to not have to deal with any of that embarrassment and keep this sin between you and Allah, and no one needs to ever know, is a simple tawbah. It's a simple tawbah. That's why the narration says, this narration we've shared before, that the sixth Imam told his companion, he says, Allah hides the sins of the one who repents to him. And his companion said, how? The Day of Judgment is Yawma Tubla Sarair. That's when all the secrets come out. And he said, yes, all the secrets come out, but not those deeds that this person had done tawbah from. That's between you and Allah. That's between me and Allah. And the narration says, Allah will make the angels forget what this person had done. And he makes the ground on which he committed this sin forget. And he makes his own limbs stay quiet. And he shows up on the Day of Judgment, and there's no one to bear witness to any of his sins. He walks in, a bright face, and everyone thinks he's such a wonderful person. They don't know what he had done, but he repented. And this is the lesson for you and I. That we don't have to put ourselves in the position of Hatib and put ourselves in this embarrassing situation, as long as we repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recite salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The next step that the Prophet took, and this was number 7, was that then he told a group of his companions to go and stand on the corners of Medina. And whoever was going out and heading towards Medina or Mecca, to stop them and to ask them and to make sure that they would not be going to give the news of the army coming. These are multiple steps the Prophet is taking. Until finally this army heads out. This army is 10,000 strong. And the narration says they started to head out. And still people don't know, where is this 10,000 person army going? They still don't know. And the Prophet wouldn't tell them. And the narration says, Uyayna ibn Hisn came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, I heard you're heading out. And I really wanted to, come and help you. Ya Rasulullah, where are we going? And the Prophet said, we are going where Allah wants us to go. Give him any information. And another one of the companions came, Ka'b ibn Malik. He said, you know what? I'm going to figure out where we're going. I said, how? He said, just leave it to me. I will get this information for you. So people don't know where they're heading. So Ka'b ibn Malik came to the Prophet. He recited poetry to the Prophet. And maybe he's thinking, I can use the emotions of the Prophet. I can get him, say, mashallah, you're so wonderful. You're amazing. You're the best. Can you do this, by the way, for me? This is how we think the Prophet is, right? He recited poetry for the Prophet. Then he said, Ya Rasulullah, I also have this one question. I've heard we're heading to this area or that area. Is this true? And the narration says the Prophet just smiled at him. And he didn't say anything. And this is the Prophet whose emotions never get the best of him. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he plans strategically and he executes strategically on his plan. And imagine where we would be in our personal lives on a community level if we planned and then executed on the plan strategically like the Prophet. The Prophet never sat there and said, oh Allah, inshallah it's going to be fine. Let's just do it. No, he planned strategically. And it's interesting because he also did his dua. When he was in Medina, he raised his hand and said, oh Allah, don't let the eyes and the ears of Mecca find out about us. But while he prays, he has his plan too. And he executes and he has faith at the same time. This is how the Prophet did things. They came to him over and over again, Ya Rasulullah, where are we going? And the Prophet simply smiled at them. And the narration says that this army moved on and it came closer and closer. As it came closer, the uncle of the Prophet, Abbas, who was still living in Mecca, was now starting to come to Medina. The Prophet brought him with him because Abbas was then going to play a little bit of a role in Mecca. He joins the army of the Prophet. They come even closer to Mecca. Now they're so close to Mecca, if you come out of Mecca and you take a look and you see what's happening, you might be able to see the army. And the narration says, nighttime came. And the Prophet ordered all of his people to light up fires. And these fires were so much now that the army seemed even bigger than what it was. Every corner you look at, there's fire. And the narration says you could hear the horses and you could hear the camels. And this is completely different from before. All of this army has come. And the narration says Abbas looked at this army. He said, if the Prophet attacks Mecca tomorrow, there will be nothing left of Quraysh. And the Prophet told him, he said, you don't have to worry about that. Go and find Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan is in this location. He is scouting our army. Go and find Abu Sufyan. And the Prophet gave him his own mule, his own ride. Every one of the rides of the Prophet had their own name, interestingly. And Abbas rides on this mule and he goes and he finds Abu Sufyan because Abu Sufyan was with his other friends and they were looking at this army and they still didn't know whose army this was. And they said, well, maybe it's this army and maybe it's that army. And every army they used to think about, they say this, that they're not this big. They're not that great. Can't be this tribe, can't be that tribe. Until Abbas came to them, he said, what are you thinking? This is Muhammad who's come for you. And Abu Sufyan, you can imagine the situation that he's in. And Abbas told him, he said, listen, if he attacks tomorrow, you have no chance at all. He said, what do you think I should do? He said, come with me. I've brought the mule of the Prophet. And as long as we ride on the mule of the Prophet, you have protection amongst these Muslims. I want to take you to speak to the Prophet himself. Look at how strategically the Prophet is, how delicate. Now, this is a city that tortured his companions. This is a city who took away so many lives of so many Muslims. But you see, his emotions don't get the best of him. He's just following the plan, step by step, because he wants the least bleeding possible. He wants the least blood to be shed. The narration says, Abbas brought Abu Sufyan on the mule. And the narration says, as he was walking amongst the camp of these Muslims, every single Muslim who would see Abu Sufyan, he wanted to just jump on him. He wanted to attack him because this is the Abu Sufyan. This is the Abu Sufyan. And every time Abbas would say, I have come with the mule of the Prophet. This is the protection of the Prophet. He said, let's take him so that he meets the Prophet. The narration says they took Abu Sufyan to the Prophet with a couple of his other friends. And the Prophet turned to them and he said, listen, hasn't the time come for you to realize that you have to submit yourself to Allah? It's like you've been defeated so much. Now the time has come. Submit yourself to Allah. And the narration says out of the 3 or 4, 2 or 3 of them embraced the faith there. Except Abu Sufyan said, still I can't take it. And if it was you and I would say, well, enough with this. What is this? Don't you see it's over? Done. Get rid of him. And the narration says the Prophet told Abbas, take him to your tent. Give him some more time. And the narration says Abbas took him to the tent. And then Abu Sufyan was speaking to Abbas. And Abu Sufyan was telling Abbas, maybe I can still put together an army. Maybe I can get some help. Maybe I can come up with something. And the narration says the Prophet heard it from his own tent. And he said, even if you put together an army, Allah will humiliate you. And at this point, Abu Sufyan finally, he gave in. And the narration says the next morning, the Muslims got up to pray. This is the power of Jama'ah. The Muslims got up to pray. This is not 2 people, 10 people. This is thousands of people. They got up to pray. And Abu Sufyan was just watching all of these Muslims, how they all got up to pray together. And when the Prophet was doing his wudu, how they would come to grab the water that was falling from his wudu. And there and then he got the message that there's no more running away from this. And finally, on the morning of the conquest of Mecca, he embraced the faith. To what extent and what was his intentions and all of that kind of stuff is a separate discussion. Outwardly, that is when he embraced the faith. Now, what you have is a very beautiful scene. What you have is a very beautiful scene and a big lesson for you and I to learn. Because now you have 10,000 outside of Mecca. And in Mecca, you have people that you don't even know, will they be able to be strong enough or not, or what's going to happen? But doesn't this remind you of another moment that came not too long ago? Because only 3 years ago, the army of Ahzab had come with 10,000. And they were outside the gates of Medina. And they laid siege to Medina. And these Muslims thought they would never see the light of tomorrow. They never thought that they would even live through that. And the Prophet told them, not only will you live through this, there is a fate. You will take over Rome and Persia. And of course they couldn't believe it. You and I couldn't believe it either. And how the tables had turned now. That in only 3 years, before you had 3,000 outside of Medina, and you didn't know if you were going to live till tomorrow, and now you have 10,000 outside of Mecca. And the people of Mecca don't know if they will live till tomorrow. And this goes to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does as He wishes. And if He wants to turn the tables, He will turn the tables faster and quicker than you and I can even believe. This is not 10 years, 15 years. This is 3 years. And this shows you the value of patience and perseverance. The Prophet, he did his duty and he knew this is what I have to do right now. Now this is what I have to do. Now this is what I have to do. And he left the outcome to Allah. And of course, when you leave the outcome to Allah, Allah is the one who pulls out an outcome that you and I cannot even believe. How the tables turned between Ahzab and the Fath of Mecca that were only 3 years, maybe less than 3 years apart. And this conquest of Mecca is happening exactly in these days that we are going through. Around the 20th of Ramadan is when the conquest of Mecca will happen. How will the Prophet approach Mecca? Will he attack them? Will he spare some of their lives? How harsh will he be? The same way the people of Mecca were harsh with them. Will he kick the people of Mecca out of their city and walk away with their wealth? Or will he be rahmatan lil alameen? We'll have to wait till tomorrow to see how the Prophet pulled off this victory that had the least amount of fatalities, had the least amount of people, even the smallest amount of blood that was shed. How an army of 10,000 comes and almost nothing happens. And the Prophet took over the city of Mecca. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll move on to that discussion. Let us take a moment to recite Suratul Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat, especially the marhumin and marhumat of the sponsors of tonight's program, with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.